United Nations-organised conference on Afghanistan is being held here in Doha. The Taliban administration, which came to power in 2021, has not been invited to take part. The UN considers Afghanistan its biggest humanitarian crisis. The Taliban designated ambassador to the UN has issued a statement saying any meeting without its participation is unproductive, even counterproductive. It has a legitimate right to express its position. And the statement questions how decisions can be acceptable or implemented if the Taliban aren't part of the process. Finally, it says the move is discriminatory and unjustified. It calls for the issues to be resolved through a pragmatic approach. Well, let's bring in Osama bin Javaid. She's at the conference for us here in Doha. Osama, I believe you've been talking to various people there. What are you hearing from different parties?
Well, after a hiatus of about a year and a half, Doha is finally milling with diplomatic presence. You've got special representatives for nearly 24 countries here talking about Afghanistan, talking about the solutions for Afghanistan and their different opinions about Afghanistan as well. It is an interesting venue because the people who are actually in charge of Afghanistan, you said, are not here. And the biggest issue that Afghanistan faces is about the rights of women. There are no women representatives who are either from Afghanistan or living in exile. The United Nations says that this is a conference to bring together the world opinion. So when they talk to the Taliban and the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan's government, they should speak with a unanimous voice. But it is interesting. I've been speaking to various special representatives, and one diplomat told me that they are surprised at how a laundry list of priorities is being put together by countries, depending on whether they're regional countries, whether they're Arab countries, whether they're international players. Their priorities are different about Afghanistan. The unanimous point of view is that there should be rights for the people of Afghanistan. 4 million people of Afghanistan, a vast majority are living with desperate levels of poverty, and the United Nations should continue in some way or form its aid mission in Afghanistan. Tom West, the special representative for the United States, says this is a positive development. All sides are together. We've spoken to the former US envoy to Afghanistan, Zalmay Khalilzad, who thinks that the Taliban should have been there. And we've also heard from the Taliban Foreign Ministry, where it says that the positive steps that have been taking place in the last year and a half, with terms to eradication of narcotics, in terms of how there has been a general amnesty, a sense of corruption-free Afghanistan that the Taliban government would tell you. Those are the issues that the international community must come together and talk to the Taliban government. And this is the second day, as you said. Yesterday they came together to talk about the problems and the issues that are being faced, and today they're meeting to find out solutions and how and if there are any incentives that they can give to the Taliban so that they can ease up on their reforms against government and allow Afghans to live free lives.
Osama bin Javaid, with the latest from those talks here in Doha. We'll have more from him in a moment, but thanks so much for now. Thank you, Osama. Well, let's bring in our diplomatic editor, James Bays. He joins me now here on set. James, so the Taliban, as we've been saying multiple times, obviously isn't here. I believe you were talking to the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres on the plane, who is here. Any insights from him as to why?
Well, the Taliban are not here, and the women of Afghanistan are not here, and that has angered representatives of both. You heard the man who, in the statement you read at the beginning, the man who would be the Taliban's ambassador to the United Nations if they were recognised by the international community, and certainly Afghan women's groups I've spoken to, they're angry as well. The Secretary-General, and I was on the plane with him as he flew from New York here to Doha, and we had a chat on the plane, a couple of chats on the plane. He made it clear that what the purpose of this meeting is not to negotiate with the Taliban, it's just to get the international community all on the same page, because lots of different countries have been doing different things, lots of different countries have different capabilities. He believes that if he can get them all working together with a plan, then it's going to give him so much more leverage then to deal with the Taliban. And he was in reasonably good form about this, even though the UN's had a great deal of criticism on this. Partly because at the end of last week, the UN Security Council managed to get a resolution through, finally, condemning the Taliban and their policy with regard to women, and particularly banning female aid workers and female UN workers. And I think he believes that gives him a little bit more power going into this meeting to get that international community with one united view on how to proceed.
Sure. So if the UN wants this united view, and Osama was saying this when he was talking to different parties at the talks. It does sound like there are some points of contention, though. What are those points of contention when you're trying to find this unified position?
There are definitely really difficult points of contention, not just actually among the international community, but even among the UN itself. There's a big row going on in the UN between the political side and the humanitarian side, what to do about their operations on the ground, because most of their operations have ground to a halt since the Taliban banned women UN workers from doing their jobs. Now, there are some in the humanitarian side say, well, that's bad that we can't have women working, but we've still got to get the aid out there. We've still got to get the food. We've still got to get the medical supplies, and we should just do it with men. The political side said that sends an awful message to the Taliban. So there's disagreement within the UN, disagreement with the international community on the issue of women. The other issues the Secretary-General outlined to me, governance. He wants to try and persuade the Taliban to bring other parties into the government, to share power. That has proved impossible so far, but he believes with a united international community, perhaps they can do that. He's worried about groups setting up a safe haven in Afghanistan. He's worried Al-Qaeda, ISIL, other groups reforming in Afghanistan. And then the last issue on his list is one that we don't talk about as much as we used to talk about, but the opium fields are still there in Afghanistan, particularly in the south and east of the country. He's worried about the drugs trade.
I'm sure he is. I wonder what is the next step after this. So you've tried to find a unified position. The Security Council resolution sounds like that may be possible. What happens after this? Is there a conversation with the Taliban from here on in?
Well, certainly the UN will continue its conversations on the ground in Kabul with the Taliban. This meeting is not going to come up with international recognition for the Taliban. That was never on the table. And the Secretary-General made it clear to me there's no way the UN will completely pull out of Afghanistan. But there are going to be ongoing conversations. The UN has to make a decision by Friday on exactly what to do with its humanitarian operations on the ground. There's also a big review being commissioned. The former Turkish ambassador to the United Nations, Guterres, is appointed to run that, and that's to report to the Security Council on the way ahead by the end of the year. So a lot of reviews going on.
Sure.
The idea of a talk between high level, the UN and the Taliban. We had the Deputy Secretary-General in Afghanistan earlier in the year. Could we at some point see the Secretary-General talk to the Taliban? Pretty enticing prospect. I think the UN do not really want to give that up at this stage. They've already sent the Deputy Secretary-General and they've got nothing in return. They see that as one of their few bits of leverage, a meeting between the Secretary-General and the Taliban. The Taliban would have to give something to get a reward like that, because that would be seen as a step towards recognition. I don't think that's happening anytime soon.
I'm sure. So this very much an iterative step in that conversation. Our diplomatic editor, James Bays, thanks so much for joining us and giving us some more analysis here with us in Doha.